Picture a lump of wet clay, about the size of your palm. A man presses a row of little marks into it with the sharpened end of a reed, then sets it in the sun to bake hard. He hasn't drawn a picture. He hasn't written a story. He's recorded a debt. Hard proof that somebody owes him a fixed amount of grain. And that little baked brick is one of the oldest pieces of money ever found. Not a coin, not gold, not anything shiny you could bite down on to test. Because money, it turns out, did not begin as a thing you could spend. It began as a promise. And the name scratched into one of the very first of these tablets belongs to someone who wasn't a king, or a priest, or a warrior. But the second you hear his job, you'll know exactly who he was. Here's the story most of us were taught in school. A long time ago, before money, people ran their lives on barter. You had a spare goat, your neighbor had a surplus of grain, and the two of you swapped on the spot. The trouble, economists even gave it a name, the double coincidence of wants, is that you have to find someone who has exactly what you want and happens to want exactly what you've got at the exact same moment. That's clumsy. So the story goes that people invented money to grease the wheels and later invented credit on top of money. Neat. Logical. Adam Smith told a version of it in 1776, and it's been in textbooks ever since. There's just one problem. When anthropologists actually went looking for a society that ran on pure barter, they couldn't find one. Not a single one. The late anthropologist David Graeber laid this out in his 2011 book, Debt, The First 5,000 Years, and his argument is blunt. The barter age never happened. What came first wasn't cash. It was credit. It was people keeping track of who owed what. So if money didn't start with coins, where did it start? Follow the trail back far enough, and you end up in the Near East, around 10,000 years ago, right as people were first settling down to farm. And you find clay. Small clay shapes, cones, spheres, little discs, tiny cylinders, turning up by the thousands across what's now Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Turkey. For decades, nobody knew what they were. Then a researcher named Denise Schmandt-Besserat spent years cataloging them and landed on an answer that reframed everything. They were counters. A cone might stand for a small measure of grain, a sphere for a larger one, a disc for one animal from the flock. If you owed me 5 jars of oil, I could hold 5 oil-shaped tokens as proof. It's accounting, built out of clay, thousands of years before the first sentence was ever written down. And here's the detail that gives you chills. Around 3300 BCE, people started sealing these tokens inside hollow clay balls, envelopes, and then pressing the token shapes onto the outside so you could read the contents without cracking it open. Eventually, somebody realized the marks on the outside made the tokens inside pointless. Skip the tokens, keep the marks. That, Schmandt-Besserat argued, is where writing itself was born, out of the sheer need to keep the books. Now the picture sharpens. By around 3400 to 3000 BCE, in the city of Uruk in southern Mesopotamia, those marks had become an actual script, pressed into clay tablets. And when you look at the very oldest tablets, they are almost unbearably boring. They're not poems, they're not prayers, they are receipts, inventories, records of grain in, grain out, who delivered what, who still owes. Writing did not arrive to sing about the gods. It arrived to do the books. And on some of these tablets from more than 5,000 years ago, there is a name. It shows up again and again next to tallies of barley, on around 18 separate tablets. The name is Kushim. One tablet logs tens of thousands of measures of barley, tracked across 37 months, signed off by Kushim. We don't know for certain whether Kushim was a person or the title of an office. But if it's a person, then the oldest name in all of recorded human history, the first individual we can actually call by name, was not a ruler or a hero. It was an accountant. Let that sit for a second. Before we wrote down a single king, a single god, a single love story, we wrote down the name of the person keeping track of the grain. But there's a piece still missing. Tokens and tablets track what you owe. They don't yet give you one single yardstick to measure everything against. A way to say this jar of oil, and that basket of wool, and 1 month of a worker's labor are all somehow worth the same. For that, Mesopotamia reached for 2 things: barley and silver. By around 3000 BCE, they were using a unit called the shekel. And here's what people get wrong. A shekel, at first, was not a coin. There were no coins yet. A shekel was a weight. Specifically, a weight of barley, and later, a matching weight of silver, standardized by around 2000 BCE to roughly 8.5 grams. Nobody was necessarily handing over silver. The silver was the ruler you measured value against. A cow is worth so many shekels. Rent is so many shekels. The fine for knocking out someone's tooth is so many shekels. The temples and palaces of cities like and Uruk kept these accounts, held the surpluses, and effectively became the first banks. So the money in the room wasn't a pile of coins. It was a shared agreement about what a shekel meant, and a scribe writing down who was up and who was down. And this is the part that turns dark. Once you can measure a debt precisely, you can enforce it precisely. Around 1750 BCE, the Babylonian king Hammurabi issued his famous law code, and a striking amount of it is just finance. It caps interest rates. You could charge up to 1/3 on a loan of grain, up to 20% on a loan of silver, and if a lender tried to sneak past the cap, the penalty was that the whole debt got wiped out. Loans had to be witnessed and written down. Why spell all this out? Because debt had teeth. If you couldn't pay, your wife, your children, or you yourself could be handed over into debt bondage, sometimes for a set number of years. Money was never just a convenience for buying bread. From very early on, it was a form of power one person could hold over another. Now, I should be fair here, because not everyone buys the strong version of this. Some economists have pushed back on Graeber, arguing that barter did happen, just between strangers and enemies, rather than inside a village, and that he overstated his case. The honest summary is this: nobody has ever found that mythical barter economy the textbooks promised. But record-keeping and debt? Those are staggeringly old, older than coins by thousands of years. So if the ledger came first, what did people actually treat as wealth out in the world, away from the temple accountants? Very often, the answer walked around on 4 legs: cattle. Across an astonishing range of cultures, a person's fortune was counted in animals. It's baked right into our language. The Latin word for money is pecunia, and it comes straight from pecus, the Latin word for cattle. The Roman writer Cicero could still hear the connection. Trace it back further and you hit an ancient root that meant livestock and movable wealth in the same breath. In many societies, a bride price, or the blood payment you owed a family if you killed one of their own, was reckoned in head of cattle. Cattle are a strange kind of money. They breed, they die, they need feeding, but they're valuable, they're countable, and everyone agrees they matter, which is really the only rule money has to follow. Then there's the money that came out of the sea. Cowrie shells, small, glossy, nearly impossible to counterfeit, and light enough to carry by the thousand. In China, cowries were used as valuables as far back as the Shang dynasty, over 3,000 years ago. The link ran so deep that the Chinese character for a cowrie shell became a building block inside dozens of words for wealth, trade, buying, and value. It is still hiding in the writing today, and this was no local quirk. Cowries, harvested mostly from the warm waters of the Maldives, ended up being used as money across parts of Asia and, for centuries, across large regions of Africa, counted out in strings the way we'd count rolls of coins. One little shell, moving across half the planet, agreed by millions of people to be worth something. And then, to show you just how strange this can get, there's the island of Yap in the Pacific. The people of Yap used money made of stone, huge limestone discs with a hole through the middle, some of them 12 feet across and weighing thousands of pounds. They didn't even have the limestone. They quarried it on other islands hundreds of miles away and hauled it home by canoe and raft. Here's the beautiful part. When one of these giant stones changed owners, nobody moved it. It just stayed where it was, by the path or outside a house, and everyone on the island simply knew it now belonged to someone else. There's a famous account of a stone that was lost overboard on the journey home and sank to the sea floor, and the community agreed it still counted. Its owner was still rich. Nobody could see it, nobody could touch it, and it was still money. If that sounds absurd to you, I'd gently point out that most of your money is numbers on a screen you will also never touch. So where, in all of this, are the coins? The gold, the stamped discs, the thing you probably pictured the moment I said the word money. They show up almost at the end of the story. The first true coins, lumps of a natural gold and silver alloy called electrum, stamped with the mark of a lion, were minted in the kingdom of Lydia, in what's now Western Turkey, under a king named Alyattes, around 600 BCE. His even more famous successor, Croesus, became a byword for wealth so vast we still say rich as Croesus. And that's the twist worth sitting with. By the time the first coin was ever struck, human beings had already been using money, real money, debts and shekels and shells and ledgers, for thousands of years. Coins weren't the beginning of money. They were a late, brilliant convenience, a way to shrink the temple's ledger down to something you could drop in your palm and carry to the next town. And that's the reframe this whole story has been building toward. We tend to think money is a thing, metal, paper, gold, locked in a vault. It isn't. Money is a record. It's a shared agreement about who owes what and who is worth what, held in the collective memory of a whole community. The clay tablet, the giant stone at the bottom of the sea, the silver shekel that mostly never moved, the number in your bank account tonight. They are all the same invention wearing different clothes. That's not a pile of gold. That's a promise, backed by everyone agreeing to remember it the same way. The coin was just the moment we made the promise portable. So run it back. 10,000 years ago, little clay tokens counting sacks of grain. By 3300 BCE, those tokens becoming marks, and the marks becoming writing. By 3000 BCE, a scribe named Kushim signing for the barley, and a weight called the shekel, turning everything into a single measurable value. By 1750 BCE, Hammurabi carving the rules of debt into stone. Cattle standing in for wealth from Rome to the grasslands. Shells crossing oceans to become money on 3 continents. Stone discs too heavy to lift, changing hands without moving an inch. And only then, around 600 BCE, the first coin. The receipt came first. The cash came last. Which brings us back to you, right now. Tonight, you'll probably pay for something without touching a single coin or a single note. You'll tap a card, or press a phone against a reader, and a number somewhere will tick down, while a number somewhere else ticks up. No metal will move, no gold will be weighed, and in that instant, you'll be doing the exact same thing that man with the reed and the wet clay was doing 5,000 years ago, updating the great shared ledger of who owes what to whom. The money in your account was never really a thing you own. It's a promise the world has agreed to keep. All the research is linked in the description.